Hello, friends. Before we dive into today's story, please help me grow this channel by subscribing, sharing this video with others, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's get started with our story. The reading room at Chester Holloway's law firm felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Relatives packed into a space meant for 10, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father, Roland, sat in the front row, his $1,000 suit perfectly pressed, checking his Rolex every 30 seconds like he had somewhere more important to be. Next to him, my mother, Vera, clutched her designer purse against her chest, her knuckles white from the grip. She hadn't spoken to me since the funeral, just shot me cold glances that said everything she was thinking. "This is taking too long," Dad muttered to his personal lawyer. "I have a board meeting at 3. Even now, even at the reading of his own mother's will, he couldn't stop thinking about work. That was Roland Whitmore in a nutshell, a man who knew the price of everything but the value of nothing. My Uncle Dalton stood against the wall, his bulk taking up enough space for 2 people, the oldest of Grandma's 3 sons. He'd inherited her height, but none of her wisdom. His bloodshot eyes darted around the room, calculating, measuring, already spending money he didn't have yet. His third wife, a woman half his age named Brittany, filed her nails and looked bored. She'd only known Grandma for 6 months, but here she was, ready to collect. $1,000,000. Dalton whispered to his brother Preston. "Even split 3 ways after taxes. We're still looking at $10 million each minimum." Preston nodded eagerly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. The youngest son, Preston, had spent his entire adult life in and out of casinos, always one bet away from the big score. His ex-wife sat 3 rows back with their 2 teenage kids I'd met exactly once. Everyone wanted their piece of Opal Whitmore's empire. The side rows were filled with cousins, distant relatives, and people I swore I'd never seen before in my life. Someone's new boyfriend was actually taking notes on his phone like he was already planning investments. It was disgusting. Days ago, we'd put Grandma in the ground and these vultures were practically salivating. "Where the hell is Chester?" Dad demanded, his voice cutting through the whispered conversations. "This is unprofessional." The door opened, and Chester Holloway walked in carrying a leather folder. At 72, he moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned not to rush for anyone. He'd been Grandma's attorney for 40 years, had seen her build her shipping empire from nothing, had been there through every triumph and setback. The look on his face was unreadable, but when his eyes met mine, something passed between us. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. "Maybe. Thank you all for coming," Chester began, setting the folder on the podium. "Before we begin, I need to remind everyone that Mrs. Whitmore's will was drafted with meticulous care and is legally bulletproof. Any attempts to contest it will be met with the full force of the law firm she helped build." Dad scoffed. "Just get on with it." "Chester, we all know why we're here." Chester's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Very well. The last will and testament of Opal Marie Whitmore, executed 6 months prior to her passing." The room fell silent. This was it, the moment they'd all been waiting for. The payday that would solve all their problems, fund all their schemes, satisfy all their greed. But I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about Grandma's hand in mine 3 weeks ago. How light it felt. Like she was already halfway to somewhere else. I was thinking about the last sunset we watched together from her bedroom window. The way the light caught the tears on her cheeks when she told me she was proud of me. I was thinking about how none of these people had been there for that. Not one. Chester opened the folder and pulled out the first year document. The paper looked official, formal, weighted with importance. But there was something else in that folder. I could see it. Multiple envelopes sealed. Waiting. Chester's fingers hesitated for just a moment on that final envelope. And when he looked up, he was looking directly at me. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. And with his first words, I knew Grandma had planned something none of us expected. Because Opal Whitmore never did anything the conventional way, and she certainly wasn't going to start with her final goodbye. Years ago, I was nobody special, just another construction foreman in Portland, running crews on commercial buildings and coming home to a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like whatever my neighbor was cooking. My Days started at 5 in the morning with black coffee, and blueprints ended at 7 at night with a beer and whatever game was on TV. It was simple, predictable, and I was fine with that. My relationship with my family had always been like a puzzle with missing pieces. Dad, Roland Whitmore, was a big-shot investment banker who moved us from Portland to New York when I was 15. Then moved himself back to Portland when I was 18, leaving me to figure out college on my own. He sent money, sure, but never time, never presence. Our conversations lasted exactly as long as it took for him to make sure I wasn't embarrassing the family name. "You're working construction?" he'd said when I told him about my job with a business degree. "Garrett, that's beneath you. I like building things." I'd replied, "Things that last." He'd hung up without saying goodbye. That was 2 years before Grandma got sick. Mom, Vera, was even worse in her own way. She'd married Dad for his last name and the status it brought. She spent her days at the country club planning fundraisers for causes she couldn't actually name and getting her picture in the society pages. When I was young, she'd sometimes look at me like she was surprised I existed, like I was an accessory she'd forgotten she'd purchased. My uncles were their own special brand of disappointing Dalton. The eldest had burned through 3 marriages and 6 businesses, each failure more spectacular than the last. He had this way of making everything sound like a sure thing, right up until it collapsed. Preston, the youngest, lived his life like it was one long Vegas weekend. He'd call me maybe once a year, always needing just a small loan that we both knew he'd never pay back. Then came that October morning that changed everything. I was reviewing permits when my phone rang. Grandma. Opal's name on the screen was unusual enough to make me step outside to answer. "Garrett, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear something different in her voice, a weight that hadn't been there before. "I need to see you. Can you come by this weekend?" "Of course, Grandma. Everything okay?" "We'll talk when you get here." The drive to Cannon Beach took 2 hours, but I'd made it in 90 minutes. Grandma's oceanfront mansion sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific 28 rooms of timber and glass that she'd built in 1995 after her company went international. But when I arrived, she wasn't in any of those grand rooms. I found her in the kitchen making tea the way she always had, like the world wasn't shifting under her feet. "Pancreatic cancer," she said simply, pouring me a cup. Stage 4. The doctors give me 18 months if I'm lucky. The mug burned my hands, but I held on anyway, needing something to anchor me. "What about treatment? Second opinions? There has to be something." "I'll fight it," she said, sitting across from me at the small breakfast table where she'd fed me pancakes every Sunday when I was a kid. "But I need someone with me. Someone I trust. Your father has already started calling about power of attorney. Your uncles are circling like sharks. I need someone who gives a damn about me and not just my bank account." "I'll move in tomorrow," I said without hesitation. "Garrett, your job, your life in Portland. You're my family, Grandma. My real family. The job will be there when I get back." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers felt fragile, like bird bones, but her grip was still strong. "You know what I remember most about you? When you were 7, there was a boy at your school, Timothy something. His father had lost his job, and he stopped bringing lunch. You gave him your lunch money every day for a month. Came home hungry, but never said a word. I only found out because Timothy's mother called to thank me for raising such a kind boy. I didn't know you knew about that. Mothers always know. Sweetheart, and grandmothers know even more. That's when I realized you understood what really mattered in this world. Not the money, not the status, but the simple act of showing up for someone who needs you. That night, I called my boss and arranged indefinite leave. I packed my apartment in 6 hours. By the next evening, I was unpacking in one of Grandma's guest rooms, ready for whatever came next. Neither of us knew then that it would be 18 months of revelation, heartbreak, and the ultimate test of what family really means. The first sign of trouble came exactly 1 week after I moved in. Dad's Mercedes pulled into the driveway at 8 hours in the morning, and he walked in without knocking, carrying a briefcase full of documents. "Mother, we need to discuss your assets," he announced, not even acknowledging me at the breakfast table. "With your diagnosis, it's crucial we protect the estate from taxation issues." Grandma set down her coffee cup slowly. "Roland, I haven't seen you in 6 months. And your first words aren't even hello. This is important, he insisted, spreading papers across the table. Sign here and here. It's just transferring some assets into protected trusts. Standard procedure. She picked up one of the documents, read it carefully, then slid them all back toward him. These trusts would give you control over my accounts immediately. Someone needs to manage things if you become incapacitated. I have cancer, Roland, not dementia, and I have Chester for legal matters. Now, would you like to have breakfast with your son and me, or did you drive all this way just to try to rob me? His face turned red. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourself. There's a difference. One I taught you long ago, though apparently the lesson didn't stick. He grabbed his papers and stormed out, through the window. I watched him make a phone call before driving away. Within an hour, Mom called Grandma's landline. Opal. Dear. Mom's fake sweetness oozed through the speaker. Roland's just concerned. Perhaps I should come visit. Help with arrangements. Vera, you haven't stepped foot in this house in 2 years. Don't start pretending to care now. The line went dead. Grandma turned to me with a sad smile. The vultures smell death. Garrett, watch how quickly they circle. She was right. Over the next 3 months, the attempts became more aggressive. Uncle Dalton showed up one night reeking of bourbon, pounding on the door at midnight. I need 50,000, he shouted when I answered. My restaurant's going under. She's sitting on millions while her son loses everything. Go home. Dalton, you're drunk, you little leech, he snarled, jabbing a finger at my chest. Playing the good grandson while we all know you're just waiting for your payday. How much is she promising you? 10%, 20? I'm here because I love her. Love. He spat the word like it was poison. Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't save businesses. Now get her down here. Or I'm coming in. I blocked the doorway. Try it. We stood there. Uncle and nephew. Family divided by greed and principle. Finally, he backed away. This isn't over. That money belongs to her sons, not some charity case grandson. The worst part was that Grandma heard everything. I found her sitting by her bedroom window, tears on her cheeks. Did I fail them that badly? She whispered. How did my boys become such strangers? Uncle Preston's approach was different, but equally cruel. He hired a psychiatrist to evaluate Grandma, claiming she wasn't mentally fit to manage her affairs. The doctor arrived unannounced one Tuesday afternoon. I'm here for Opal Whitmore's cognitive assessment, he announced. Grandma stood in the doorway, frail but fierce. Young man, I built a shipping empire from nothing, negotiated with unions and government officials, and ran board meetings until last year. I can still beat anyone in this house at chess. Recite Shakespeare from memory and balance my own checkbook. Now, get off my property before I call the police and my lawyer. The doctor left, but Preston didn't stop. He called Adult Protective Services, claiming I was taking advantage of a vulnerable elder. The investigation was humiliating for Grandma, having to prove to strangers that she was staying in her own home by choice. Meanwhile, her health deteriorated. Chemotherapy ravaged her body. Some days, she couldn't get out of bed. I learned to manage her medications, change IV bags, help her to the bathroom. The work was hard, but the emotional toll was worse. Watching this titan of a woman who'd built an empire and raised a family, reduced to hoping just one of her children would visit without an agenda. Mom sent flowers every month with identical cards. Thinking of you. Get well soon. Vera, never a visit, never a real phone call. Just flowers that Grandma asked me to donate to the hospital. At least other patients will enjoy them, she said. Someone should get comfort from my children's gestures, even if I can't. The betrayals piled up like winter snow, cold and suffocating. Each one broke Grandma's heart a little more until I worried she'd die of disappointment before the cancer took her. But through it all, she kept planning something, meeting with Chester, making arrangements she wouldn't discuss with me. Months before Grandma passed, everything shifted. It was a gray February morning when Chester Holloway's Lincoln Town car pulled into the driveway. He carried a thick leather portfolio and a recording device, his face set with the determination of a man on a mission. Garrett, I need you to give us privacy, Grandma said, already dressed in her best navy suit, despite rarely leaving bed anymore. Chester and I have business to discuss. They locked themselves in her study for 4 hours. I could hear the occasional sound of papers shuffling, the scratch of pens on documents, Chester's deep voice asking questions, and Grandma's clear responses. When they finally emerged, Chester looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman, Garrett," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Remember that no matter what happens in the coming months, things may get difficult, but trust the process." After he left, I found Grandma in the study, staring out at the ocean. Multiple documents were spread across her desk, but she gathered them quickly when I entered, sliding them into a locked drawer. "What was all that about?" I asked. "Insurance," she said simply, "making sure the right things happen for the right reasons." Over the next few weeks, Grandma seemed energized by whatever she'd arranged with Chester. She started documenting everything, every missed visit, every manipulative phone call, every attempt to get at her money. She had me install a recording system for the house phone, all legal and above board for medical emergency purposes. She said with a wink. The recordings revealed more than either of us expected. Dad calling her doctor, trying to get information about her mental state. Preston attempting to bribe her housekeeper Maria for copies of financial statements. Dalton on a 3-way call with both brothers, planning to contest any will that didn't give them equal shares of everything. "The old bat can't last much longer," Dalton said on one recording. "We just need to make sure the kid doesn't manipulate her into anything stupid. I've got my lawyer ready," Dad added. "The second she dies, we file for an immediate freeze on all assets. Garrett won't be able to touch a penny." Grandma listened to these recordings with me, her face never changing, but her hand trembled as she took notes. "They're not even pretending anymore," she said quietly. "At least now I know where we all stand." Her health declined sharply after that. The cancer had spread to her liver and Jones hospice came in mid-April. I took complete leave from work, sleeping on a cot in her room in case she needed anything at night. Those last weeks were brutal and beautiful in equal measure. We talked about everything during those long nights when pain kept her awake. Her childhood during the Depression, eating flour soup and wearing shoes made of cardboard. How she'd started her company with 1 truck and a loan from a fisherman who believed in her. Her first million. How she'd celebrated alone because her husband had already passed and her sons were too young to understand. "I wanted to give them everything. I never had," she said one night, morphine making her voice dreamy. "But somewhere along the way, I gave them everything except what mattered. Values, compassion, the understanding that money is a tool, not a goal." 2 weeks before she died, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Garrett, I need you to promise me something. When Chester reads the will, no matter what happens, don't defend me. Don't explain my choices. Let them react. Let them show exactly who they are. Grandma, what did you do? I'm setting things right, or as right as they can be now. Just promise me you won't interfere. Let Chester handle everything. I promise." She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen in weeks. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. Better than okay. You're going to understand what real wealth means." Her funeral was scheduled for a Thursday. She passed on a Monday evening, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold and pink. Her last words were clear and calm. "The truth always surfaces, Garrett. Like oil on water, it always rises to the top. Watch for it." The obituary ran in 3 newspapers. Within hours, relatives I'd never heard of were calling about funeral arrangements. Dad flew in from New York the next morning, already dressed in black, already calculating. Mom arrived separately, making sure the society photographers captured her grief. My uncles came together, a united front of entitlement. At the funeral, they all performed beautifully. Dad's eulogy about family values and maternal love would have been touching if I hadn't heard him call her a stubborn old fool on the phone the week before. The tears, the memories they shared, the touching anecdotes, all of it rang hollow as a bell. Chester announced the will reading for the following week. The vultures circled immediately, but I just waited, trusting whatever Grandma had planned. The conference room at Chester Holloway's law firm could have been a stage for a play about greed. Every seat was taken, and people stood against the walls like they were afraid to miss a single word. Dad sat in front with his personal lawyer, a sharp-faced woman who kept checking documents on her tablet. Mom had brought her financial advisor, a nervous man who kept adjusting his tie. Uncle Dalton cracked his knuckles repeatedly, while Preston sweated through his shirt despite the cool temperature. Chester entered precisely at 2 hour, carrying the same leather portfolio from that day 6 months ago. He set it down carefully, adjusted his glasses, and looked at each person in the room with the steady gaze of someone who'd seen every kind of family drama in his 40-year career. "Before we begin," Chester said, his voice carrying the authority of law and experience, "I want to remind everyone that Mrs. Whitmore executed this will 6 months ago, while in full mental capacity, witnessed by 3 medical professionals and 2 independent attorneys. Any attempts to contest it will be met with the full resources of this firm." Dad's lawyer started to speak, but Chester raised his hand. "Please hold all questions until I finish reading the complete document." He opened the portfolio and pulled out the first document, the last will and testament of Opal Marie Whitmore, dated February 15th of this year. "To my son, Roland Whitmore, I leave my complete collection of family photographs stored in albums in the study. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family gathering you missed while building your fortune, perhaps looking at them, will help you understand what you traded for your success." Dad's face went from expectant to confused to furious in 3 seconds. "Photos, that's it," Chester continued without acknowledging the outburst. "To my son, Dalton Whitmore, I leave my personal recipe book, including the recipes for every meal you claimed you could improve, but never once cooked. For me, may you finally learn that talking about doing something and actually doing it are different things." Dalton stood up so fast, his chair fell backward. "This is insane. Where's the money?" "To my son, Preston Whitmore, I leave my antique deck of playing cards and the ones my father used to teach me that gambling with family love is the only bet you're guaranteed to lose." Preston's face turned purple. "She's mocking us. This whole thing is a joke. To my daughter-in-law, Vera Whitmore," Chester continued steadily, "I leave my collection of costume jewelry. Pieces that look expensive but are worth nothing, much like the affection you showed me over the years." Mom gasped, her hand flying to the real pearls at her throat. How dare she? The room erupted in angry voices, threats, accusations flying like shrapnel. Chester waited patiently for the noise to die down, then pulled out a second envelope. "To my grandson, Garrett Whitmore, I leave my 1947 Cadillac coupe, purchased with the first profit from my business. It still runs because it was maintained with care, not money. Like love, it only needed consistent attention to last. I felt every eye in the room turn to me with hatred so pure it could have burned through steel. That's all." Dad shouted, "Where's the 46 million? The oceanfront property, the shipping company, the investment portfolios?" Chester pulled out a thick document. Yes, the estate valued at $46 million. I have here a complete financial disclosure, also executed 6 months ago." The room went silent as death. Years ago, upon receiving her diagnosis, Mrs. Whitmore began liquidating her assets. She sold the shipping company to her employees for $1 with the provision that all profits for the next decade go into their retirement funds. She liquidated all investment portfolios and properties, converting everything to cash. "Million in cash," Dalton breathed. "Where is it?" Chester smiled, the first real emotion he'd shown. "Distributed as follows. Million was used to establish the Whitmore Foundation for Childhood Cancer Research, focusing on pancreatic cancer that affects children. Million funded full college scholarships for 200 first-generation students from working families. Million was distributed among 15 food banks and homeless shelters. In Oregon and Washington, Million went to Doctors Without Borders." The silence was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming. "The oceanfront mansion," Chester continued, "was sold to the Oregon State Parks Department for $1 to be converted into a public beach access and nature preserve. By Mrs. Whitmore's specific instruction, it will be named the Garrett Whitmore Preserve, honoring the only family member who understood that the best views shouldn't be reserved only for those who can afford them." "No," Dad whispered. "She couldn't have. We're her children. That money was ours by right." Chester pulled out one final document. There is one more bequest. $1 million remains in a trust with Mr. Garrett Whitmore as the sole trustee. This money can only be used for one specific purpose: to pay for medical care and support for any family member who becomes ill and has no one else to turn to. As Mrs. Whitmore wrote, Garrett will help even those who don't deserve it because that's who he is. This trust ensures he can afford to keep being himself. The conference room exploded into chaos. Dad lunged across the table, grabbing Chester's collar. You helped her do this. This is fraud. Manipulation, elder abuse. Chester, completely unfazed, simply said, There are security cameras recording this assault. Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you sit down. Uncle Dalton was on his phone with his lawyer, screaming about mental incompetence and undue influence. Preston actually kicked a chair across the room. Mom sat frozen, her face white as paper, calculating and recalculating money that no longer existed. We'll destroy you, Dad pointed at me, his fingers shaking with rage. You poisoned her against us. You stole our inheritance. I didn't know, I said quietly. I had no idea she'd done any of this. Liar. Dalton roared. 3 years living with her, and you expect us to believe you didn't know? Chester cleared his throat. Mr. Garrett Whitmore was never informed of these decisions. Mrs. Whitmore insisted on that. She wanted his care to be genuine, not motivated by knowledge of any particular inheritance. There are sealed affidavits from the witnesses confirming he was never present for any financial discussions. They stormed out one by one, throwing threats like confetti. This isn't over, Dad promised. I'll spend whatever it takes to break this will. Good luck with that, Chester replied calmly. You'll be fighting the American Cancer Society, 200 scholarship recipients, and the state of Oregon. I'm sure that will play well in the press. When they'd all gone, Chester handed me a sealed envelope. She wanted you to read this alone. I drove to what used to be Grandma's mansion, now with a new sign reading, Future Home of Garrett Whitmore Preserve, opening next summer. I sat on the bluff where we used to watch sunsets and opened her letter. My dearest Garrett, if you're reading this, then Chester has delivered my final lesson to our family. I'm sorry you had to witness their true colors, but you needed to see it. You needed to understand that DNA doesn't make a family. Love does. The money was always going to destroy them. If I'd left them millions, they would have fought over it until lawyers got most of it. If I'd left them nothing outright, they would have assumed you manipulated me, so I gave them exactly what they'd given me, tokens that look like something but mean nothing. They got what they earned. You got what you earned too. Not millions because you never wanted that. You got the truth that you're nothing like them. You got the knowledge that when someone needed you, you showed up. You gotta be the name on something that will bring joy to families for generations. The million in trust isn't really for them, we both know. They'll never ask you for help. Their pride won't let them. It's for you to use as you see fit, helping people who actually need it. I know you will. You've been doing it your whole life, usually with much less. But your real inheritance is freedom. Freedom from wondering if you're like them. Freedom from their poison. Freedom to live your life knowing you chose love over money and that choice made you wealthy in ways they'll never understand. Live well, my sweet boy. Build things that last. Love people who deserve it. And remember that the fortune I spent my life accumulating was only worth something when I gave it away to people who'd use it right. All my love. Grandma Opal, that was 2 years ago. The lawsuits all failed. Just as Chester predicted, Dad doesn't speak to me. Mom moved to California to reinvent herself. Uncle Dalton filed for bankruptcy again. Uncle Preston disappeared somewhere in Nevada, but the trust has helped 17 families, so Farda construction workers whose kids got cancer. A janitor at my company whose wife needed heart surgery. Real. People with real problems who just needed someone to give a damn. Each time I write a check, I think of Grandma smiling, knowing she'd turned her fortune into something that actually mattered. Last week, the preserve officially opened. Hundreds of families came that first day. Kids built sandcastles where Grandma's rose garden used to be. Teenagers played volleyball where the fountain stood. An elderly couple sat on a bench sharing sandwiches and watching the sunset from the exact spot where Grandma And I used to play chess. A little girl ran up to me, pointing at the sign. Is that you, Garrett? That's me. Why is your name on the park? My grandma wanted everyone to have a beautiful place to watch the ocean, I said. She believed the best things in life should be free. She sounds nice. Is she here? I looked at the waves, the families, the joy on faces that would never know Opal Whitmore's name, but would benefit from her final act of rebellion against greed. Yeah, I said, she's here. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when life gets hard. Drop a comment below sharing your own thoughts about what real wealth means to you. And if you want more stories about families, redemption, and the unexpected ways love shows up in our lives, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and remember, the best inheritance you can leave or receive isn't money. It's the knowledge that you were truly loved.